always believed I had things under control. My husband, Ethan, was dependable to a fault, loyal, hardworking, and utterly predictable. He was the kind of man who never questioned my choices, never pushed back when my mother, Diane, voiced her opinions, and most importantly, never suspected a thing. That's what made my life so easy. For years I had juggled everything effortlessly. My marriage, my social life, and the quiet indulgences I allowed myself when Ethan's back was turned. He was busy, always busy, working late nights, saving money, and making sure I had the life I wanted. I played my role well, the supportive wife, the responsible partner, but in reality, I had checked out of the marriage long before Ethan ever realized. And then, everything started falling apart. It began with something so trivial that I barely paid attention. My mother called one evening, telling me Ethan had fallen down the stairs at her house. She sounded mildly irritated, like he had inconvenienced her, rather than expressing concern. "He's making a big deal out of it," she scoffed. "I told him to stop whining and just get up, but he's acting like he broke something." I rolled my eyes. "You know how dramatic he can be." "Exactly," she huffed. "Anyway, I called an ambulance, but you don't need to rush over. It's probably nothing." I didn't rush. I didn't even think about rushing. That night, I was already committed to plans that didn't involve my husband. Ethan had been more of a background character in my life lately, and honestly I preferred it that way. The moments I spent away from him, dinners with my friends, weekends at the spa, and private time with the one person who actually made my heart race, were the ones I cherished the most. So I didn't call the hospital. I didn't check in. I told myself he'd be fine, and I let the night continue as planned. What I didn't expect was for him to stay in the hospital longer than a night. By the time I even thought to check in, almost a full day had passed. It felt too awkward to show up after so long, so I convinced myself that a text was enough. "Hope you're feeling better. Let me know when you're discharged." He never responded. Days went by and I did my best to push it out of my mind. My mother reassured me he was fine. "It's just a minor concussion and a fractured leg," she said dismissively. "Men are so weak. He'll be home soon enough." I let it go. Until Richard showed up. I hadn't seen my father in years. He and my mother had divorced when I was young, and she had made sure I never looked back. He lived in another state, had practically disappeared from my life, and now out of nowhere he was here, standing in my living room, a cold smile on his lips and two pieces of paper in his hand. One was a divorce petition. The other was a legal notice of Ethan's sudden inheritance. I stared at them, my mind racing, my stomach churning with a sudden, nauseating realization. Something had shifted. And for the first time in my life, I felt the foundation beneath me cracked. I sat there, frozen, my father's expression unreadable as he placed the two documents on the coffee table. The crisp, sharp edges of the paper felt like blades poised to cut through the carefully crafted life I had built. A divorce petition. A $40 million inheritance. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for an explanation. A way to turn this around. This had to be a misunderstanding. A joke maybe. What is this? My voice barely sounded like my own. Richard folded his arms, his sharp blue eyes, so much like mine, narrowing as he studied me. "This is what happens when you abandon your husband in a hospital bed, and assume he'll just keep taking it." My stomach lurched. I didn't abandon him. The lie tumbled out automatically, but even I knew how hollow it sounded. "Oh really?" He arched an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing you never showed up. Not once. Not a single call, not a single visit. Nothing." He shook his head, disgust evident in his tone. "You didn't even pretend to care." My throat tightened. "Mom said he was fine. She told me it wasn't a big deal." His bitter laugh cut me off. "Diane." He spat her name like venom. "Of course she'd say that. And you, like the puppet you are, believed her." Anger flared in me, but it was mixed with something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Shame. I shifted my gaze to the documents again, anything to avoid my father's stare. The divorce papers weren't entirely unexpected. Ethan had been distant for months, and I had been pulling away even longer. Our marriage was a formality at this point, a structure I had kept intact simply because it was easier than dismantling it. But the inheritance, that was something else. I wet my lips trying to keep my voice even. $40 million? Richard smirked. leaning back against the couch like he was enjoying this. That's right. Ethan's grandfather passed a while ago, left behind a trust that just matured. The money was supposed to go to Ethan when he turned 35. Guess what today is? I blinked. His birthday. My heart pounded. He never told me. Why would he? Richard shot back. He knew exactly how you and your mother would react. Do you really think he didn't notice how the two of you treated him? How Diane looked down on him? How you? He gestured toward me, his expression one of pure disappointment. Acted like he was just an accessory to your life, something you could toss aside whenever it suited you. I clenched my fists. That's not fair. Isn't it? His voice was calm, but the weight behind it crushed me. You left him to rot in that hospital, Julia. I had to fly in from another state just to make sure my son-in-law had someone by his side while he recovered. That's how much of a failure you and your mother are. My jaw tightened. I wanted to fight back to tell him he was wrong, but I had nothing. Because deep down I knew he was right. My mind raced, searching for a way to salvage this. Maybe I could talk to Ethan, explain everything. Maybe I could convince him to reconsider. If not for our marriage, then at least for a portion of the money. $40 million was life-changing, and Ethan wasn't the type to be cruel. Was he? My father seemed to read my thoughts because he let out a low, humorless chuckle. Don't even think about it. I looked up sharply. Ethan's done, Richard continued. I watched him sign those divorce papers myself. No discussion, no second chances. And as for the inheritance, you and your mother will never see a single cent of it. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Richard stood, smoothing out his sleeves like this was just another business meeting he was wrapping up. I suggest you start packing. Ethan's moving forward, and whether you like it or not, you're being left behind. Then he walked to the door, leaving me alone with the suffocating silence and the undeniable truth. I had finally lost everything. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the divorce papers like they were a foreign language I couldn't understand. My fingers trembled as I reached for them, scanning the crisp, official text. Ethan's signature was there at the bottom, bold and decisive. This wasn't a threat. It was done. A sick, twisting feeling coiled in my stomach. I had spent years believing Ethan would always be there. Silent, dependable, unwilling to walk away no matter what. He was supposed to be weak. He was supposed to be predictable. But now he was gone. And he was walking away with $40 million. I barely registered my mother walking into the living room, her voice grating in my ears. What the hell was Richard doing here? I didn't answer. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she stormed toward me. Julia, she snapped. I asked you a question. I swallowed hard and lifted the papers. Ethan filed for divorce. My voice came out hollow. She snatched the documents from my hands, her eyes narrowing as she skimmed through the pages. Oh, that little. Her face twisted with rage before she threw the papers onto the coffee table. Fine. Let him leave. You're better off without him. I shook my head, my breath unsteady. Mom. He inherited $40 million. The color drained from her face. For the first time in my life, I watched as my mother, who had always been so calculated, so in control, lost her composure. She sank onto the couch, gripping her temples as if trying to process what I had just said. $40 million, she whispered. I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air in the room felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken regret and dawning horror. Then, just as quickly, my mother straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. You need to fix this. I blinked. Fix it? He's already signed the divorce papers, Mom. He's done. He's gone. Her jaw clenched. That doesn't mean it's over. She turned to me, her eyes sharp with determination. You listen to me, Julia. You are not going to let Ethan walk away with that kind of money without a fight. A bitter laugh escaped me. And what do you expect me to do? Go beg him to take me back. If that's what it takes, yes, she snapped. You've spent years keeping him wrapped around your little finger. You think that's changed overnight? Men are weak, Julia. If you push the right buttons, he'll fold. I clenched my fists. The idea of crawling back to Ethan, of begging, made my stomach turn. But at the same time, $40 million was at stake. $40 million. I exhaled shakily. He won't even talk to me. My mother's expression darkened. Then make him. I turned away, my thoughts spiraling. The memory of Ethan lying in that hospital bed flashed in my mind, the way I had ignored him, dismissed him. He had always been a safety net, someone I could push aside and come back to whenever I wanted. But what if I had miscalculated? What if, for the first time in our marriage, he had the power now? I needed a plan. If I couldn't make Ethan take me back, maybe I could still get something out of this. I just had to figure out how. I barely slept that night. The weight of everything, the divorce, the inheritance, my mother's expectations, pressed down on me like a boulder I couldn't shake off. By morning I had made my decision. I had to get to Ethan. I didn't care if he had already signed the papers. I didn't care if Richard thought he had closed the door on me forever. $40 million was life-changing, and there was no way in hell I was going to let Ethan walk away with all of it without a fight. The only question was how. I picked up my phone, my hands clammy as I scrolled through my recent messages. The last time I had texted Ethan was a lazy one-sentence check-in while he was still in the hospital. Hope you're feeling better. Let me know when you're discharged. He hadn't responded. Now I had to find a way to get him to talk to me. I tapped out a message, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Everything I wanted to say sounded desperate or manipulative, and I couldn't afford to come across as either. So I settled for something simple. Me, hey, can we talk? I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering as the message delivered. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No response. I wasn't going to sit around waiting. I needed to see him. By noon I was parked outside his condo. Ethan had moved into the place years ago when he first got promoted, a sleek but modest unit in a high-rise building downtown. I used to mock it, telling him it was too sterile, too lifeless. Now it was my only way back in. I took a deep breath and stepped out of my car, smoothing down my dress as I walked to the front entrance. My heart pounded as I pressed the buzzer for his unit. Silence. I pressed it again. And again. Still nothing. I clenched my fists. He was avoiding me. Frustration burned through me as I turned away, my mind racing for another way in. That's when I saw movement near the side entrance. Ethan's best friend, Daniel. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I had never liked Daniel. He had always been wary of me, watching me like he saw right through me. Ethan, of course, never noticed. But Daniel did. And now he was my only way in. I hurried toward him, pasting a strained smile on my face. Daniel, I called, my voice sickly sweet. He turned, his eyes narrowing the second he saw me. Julia, he said flatly. I stopped in front of him, pushing a lock of hair behind my ear. I need to see Ethan. Daniel didn't even pretend to be polite. He crossed his arms, blocking my way. Why? I forced a laugh. Come on, Daniel. You know why. I just want to talk to him. He scoffed. Talk? Now. Where was that when he was lying in a hospital bed alone? My jaw tightened. I didn't know it was that serious. Bullshit. His voice was like steel. You didn't care. A flicker of panic shot through me. I couldn't afford for Daniel to shut me out. I softened my expression, tilting my head just slightly, the way I always did when I wanted to seem vulnerable. I made a mistake, okay? But Ethan and we were together for years. I just want to talk to him. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, then let out a dry laugh. Right. You want to talk. This wouldn't have anything to do with the $40 million, would it? Heat flooded my cheeks. That's not. Save it. He shook his head. You had your chance, Julia. You threw it away. Now you don't get access to him whenever it's convenient for you. Fury curled in my stomach. Daniel turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. Daniel, please. He yanked his arm free. Do yourself a favor, Julia. Walk away. Then he stepped inside, the door locking behind him. I stood there, shaking with frustration. Ethan was really shutting me out. And if he thought that was enough to keep me away, he was wrong. That I stormed back to my car, slamming the door shut as frustration burned through me. Daniel had shut me down completely. Ethan had ignored my message. Even my mother, who usually had a solution for everything, was eerily quiet, lost in her own spiraling thoughts about the inheritance. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ethan had always been the safe option, the one I could ignore and come back to whenever I wanted. He wasn't supposed to leave me. I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. No, I wasn't going to accept this. Ethan was shutting me out, but he wasn't the only person I could turn to. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Brad. A small, satisfied smile curled my lips as I hit dial. Brad answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and confident. Julia. Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I rolled my eyes. Don't flatter yourself. He chuckled. You only call when you need something. He wasn't wrong. Brad and I had history, long before Ethan ever suspected a thing. It had always been harmless, at least in my eyes. He was a distraction, someone I could turn to when my marriage felt like a burden. And unlike Ethan, Brad had never asked for more than I was willing to give. I got straight to the point. I need your help. There was a pause, then a knowing hum. Let me guess, this is about Ethan. I sighed, leaning back against the car seat. I just need to know what he's up to, where he's staying, who he's talking to. He's completely ignoring me. Brad was silent for a moment before he let out a low whistle. Damn, he's actually serious about leaving you, huh? Annoyance flared in me. I don't need your commentary, Brad. Can you help me or not? He chuckled again. Relax, sweetheart. I might know a guy who can get some info. Ethan was always predictable. I doubt he suddenly turned into a ghost. A flicker of satisfaction ran through me. Good. Find out where he's staying and let me know. Fine, but this favor isn't free, Julia. His voice dipped lower, teasing. I might need something in return. I rolled my eyes. Let's worry about that later. I hung up before he could push further. Leaning my head back against the seat, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. Ethan thought he could just disappear. He thought shutting me out meant I would give up. But he didn't know me as well as he thought he did. The next morning I woke up with my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen. Brad. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding. This was it. I swiped to answer. Tell me you found something, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Brad chuckled. You really are desperate, huh? I clenched my jaw. Brad. Relax, he drawled. I got what you wanted. Ethan's staying at the Monarch Hotel. He booked a suite under his company's name. Guess he didn't want any surprises. The Monarch. 5-star private secure. It wasn't where I had expected him to go, but it made sense. If Ethan wanted to disappear, he was doing a damn good job of it. I swung my legs out of bed, already calculating my next move. Did you get anything else? Nothing concrete. But here's where it gets interesting. Brad paused for effect. Ethan isn't alone. I froze. What do you mean? He's been meeting with some woman. Blonde, early 30s, looks like money. My guy saw them having dinner last night. Looked cozy. My stomach twisted violently. Cozy. I wasn't there, but from what I heard, it wasn't a business dinner. I gripped the phone, my nails digging into my palm. That was impossible. Ethan wasn't the type to move on that fast. Was he? Brad sighed. Listen, Julia. You wanted to know what he's up to, and I'm telling you, he's done with you. Whatever leverage you thought you had, it's gone. I shook my head. No, that doesn't make sense. We've barely been separated. Maybe he was done before you even realized it, Brad said, his tone amused. I hung up without another word. My pulse pounded in my ears. Ethan was seeing someone else. The thought sent a surge of something ugly through me. I had spent years keeping him at arm's length, treating our marriage like an afterthought, but he had never left. Never once had he stepped out of line. But now that he had money, he was suddenly in a hotel suite with some woman? I refused to accept it. Grabbing my coat, I stormed out of the house, my heels clicking against the pavement as I got into my car. The Monarch was a 20-minute drive away, and every second felt like an eternity. By the time I arrived, my hands were shaking. The lobby was sleek, modern, designed for people with money, real money. I walked up to the front desk, forcing my best polite smile. I'm here to see my husband, I said, keeping my voice steady. Ethan Walker. He's staying in one of the suites. The receptionist, a young woman with neatly tied back hair, tapped on her keyboard before glancing up at me. I'm sorry, but Mr. Walker has requested no visitors. I felt my breath catch. That must be a mistake. She offered me a polite but firm smile. I'm afraid it's not. The humiliation was instant. He had locked me out. I turned away from the desk, my head spinning. I needed air. I walked out of the hotel, barely able to think. Ethan wasn't just ignoring me. He was erasing me. And if he thought I was going to let him do that without a fight, he had another thing coming. I sat in my car outside the Monarch Hotel, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Ethan had always been mine. My husband. My safety net. The man who had worshipped me no matter how much I pushed him aside. And now? Now he was cutting me off. Now he was hiding behind hotel security. Now he was entertaining another woman. The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. I had spent years convinced that Ethan was weak. That he would never leave me, never stand up to me. That no matter how much I ignored him, belittled him, betrayed him, he would always be there, waiting for whatever scraps I decided to throw his way. But this was not the Ethan I knew. I needed to see him. Getting past security took time, but I was persistent. Money helps in situations like this, and a well-placed tip to one of the hotel staff got me the information I needed. Suite 1704. I took the elevator up, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The hallway was eerily quiet when I stepped out. Each step toward his door felt heavier, like I was walking toward something I wasn't ready to face. But I had no choice. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. My pulse spiked, and without thinking I tried the handle. It didn't budge. Locked, of course. I clenched my teeth and knocked one last time. Ethan, open the damn door. For a moment I thought he wouldn't. Then, the lock clicked. The door swung open just enough for me to see him. Ethan stood there, dressed casually in a fitted black t-shirt and jeans. So different from the buttoned-up, reserved man I had always known. But it wasn't his clothes that threw me. It was his eyes. Cold. Unrecognizing. Like I was a stranger. My breath hitched. Ethan. What are you doing here, Julia? His voice was calm, controlled. Completely detached. I swallowed, trying to compose myself. I needed to see you. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. For what? The divorce papers are signed. It's done. I flinched at his bluntness. You can't just disappear like this. We've been together for years, Ethan. You owe me a conversation. He let out a short, humorless laugh. A conversation? You mean like the ones you didn't have with me when I was lying in a hospital bed? The ones you ignored every time I tried to talk to you for the past 3 years. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because he was right. For the first time in years I was chasing him. And he was standing there unaffected. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't care about me, Julia. You never did. So don't stand here pretending like this is about our marriage. I stiffened. You're really moving on this fast? I spat, my anger rising. You're already sleeping with some blonde you met. What? Days ago. His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Annoyance? Amusement? You don't get to ask me that, he said coolly. Not after everything you've done. The words sliced through me. I had to get control of this conversation. Ethan, look, I made mistakes. I know that. But we had something. No, he interrupted. I had something. You had a backup plan. I froze. Ethan stepped forward, his voice dropping lower. I was your safety net, Julia. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me. Of someone who would always be there no matter how many times you pushed me aside. His words felt like knives. I clenched my fists. That's not true. He tilted his head slightly. Isn't it? For the first time I realized, he wasn't the same man I had married. He wasn't mine anymore. And the worst part? He didn't even hate me. He just didn't care. Panic set in. I needed to find a way back in. Ethan, please. We can fix this. He let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. No, Julia. We can't. And just like that, he shut the door in my face. I stood outside his door, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. He shut me out. Again. The finality in his voice, the way he didn't even hesitate. Ethan wasn't just angry. He was done. That realization sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I pounded on the door again, harder this time. Ethan. Open the damn door. We're not finished. Silence. My fingers curled into fists as frustration burned through me. You don't get to do this. You don't get to just erase me. Nothing. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I had to get to him, make him see reason. But how? My eyes darted toward the hotel hallway, searching for something, someone who could help me. The sound of approaching footsteps made me stiffen. I turned just as a woman came around the corner. Blonde, expensive looking. My stomach twisted violently. Her. The woman Brad had told me about. The one Ethan had been seen with. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as she strode toward me, her heels clicking against the floor like the ticking of a bomb. She stopped a few feet away, her blue eyes cool, assessing. You must be Julia. Her voice was calm, polished, like she had been expecting this moment. I hated her instantly. Who the hell are you? I snapped, my nails digging into my palms. She tilted her head slightly, lips curling into a knowing smile. I'm someone who actually cares about Ethan. The words hit like a slap. My vision blurred with fury. You don't know anything about our marriage. She let out a soft laugh. I know enough. I know he was alone in a hospital while you were off pretending he didn't exist. I know he gave you years of his life, and you never even looked at him the way you're looking at me right now, like you finally realize what you've lost. I felt like I was suffocating. You don't belong here. I bit out, my voice shaking. Whatever you think you have with Ethan, it's nothing. She didn't flinch. If anything, she looked amused. Funny. He doesn't seem to agree. I wanted to rip that smug expression off her face, but before I could say another word, the door behind me opened. Ethan's voice was firm. Madeline, come inside. Madeline. Her name was Madeline. It sounded expensive, polished, just like her. My stomach twisted as she turned to face him, her entire demeanor softening in a way that made my blood boil. And Ethan? He looked different. Relaxed. At ease. Like she belonged there. I couldn't take it. Ethan, I choked out, hating how desperate I sounded. Please don't do this. He didn't even hesitate. Goodbye, Julia. Then, without another glance, he closed the door. I stood there, staring at the wood in front of me, my entire body trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to move on. He wasn't supposed to choose someone else. For years, I had been the one in control, the one who decided when and how things ended. But now? Now I was nothing but a ghost in his past. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the door that had just been slammed in my face. My heart pounded in my ears, a violent, rhythmic reminder that I had lost control. Ethan had shut me out. Not just from his suite, not just from his life, but from everything. Madeline. Her name clung to my thoughts like poison. She was the reason he was moving on. She was the reason he looked at me like I was a stranger. And the worst part? She hadn't even needed to fight for him. Ethan had walked away from me on his own. My breath hitched. No, this couldn't be the end. I took a shaky step back, my mind scrambling for a way to turn this around. I had options. Ethan and I were still legally married, at least until the divorce was finalized. I could fight for a settlement, demand a share of what I had helped him build, even if I hadn't exactly been by his side the way a wife should be. $40 million. That number haunted me. I could make things difficult for him. I should make things difficult for him. But none of that mattered if he didn't see me. If I wanted to fix this, I needed to get to him first. I spent the next 2 days trying every possible angle. I called. I texted. No answer. I went back to the hotel, only to find that Ethan had upgraded his security measures. His name was no longer even listed on the guest registry. The front desk clerk, who had seemed neutral before, now had a hint of amusement in her eyes when she told me, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no Mr. Walker checked in here." Ethan had erased himself from my reach. I slammed my hands against the counter, swallowing my rage. You know he's here. Just let me leave a message. The woman gave me an apologetic smile, though I could see in her eyes she was enjoying this. If Mr. Walker wanted to speak with you, I'm sure he'd reach out. I wanted to scream. I stormed out of the hotel, my chest heaving. It felt like the entire world had flipped upside down, like I was suffocating in my own mistakes. I didn't just lose Ethan. I had been replaced. That night, I found myself back at my mother's house. She was pacing, agitated, her wine glass clutched so tightly I thought it might shatter. "You need to do something," she hissed. "We cannot let Ethan just walk away with everything." I barely heard her. My mind was still at the Monarch, still replaying the moment Ethan had looked me in the eye and told me goodbye. Diane's voice cut through my haze. "Julia, are you even listening to me?" I blinked. "What?" She exhaled sharply, setting her glass down with a loud clink. "You have legal rights here. The divorce isn't finalized. We can fight this, delay it, demand a cut of that money." My stomach twisted. "That's not what I want." Her expression hardened. "Then what do you want?" I opened my mouth but the words got stuck. I wanted Ethan back. Not because I loved him necessarily, but because I wasn't ready for him to be gone. Because the idea of him moving on so easily, so completely, made me feel small and replaceable. Because for the first time I was the one left behind. But none of that mattered now. Ethan wasn't coming back. And $40 million was still on the line. Diane must have seen something shift in my expression because she sat down beside me, lowering her voice. "You need to be smart about this, Julia. You can still come out of this with something." I hesitated. "What are you suggesting?" She leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "We contest the divorce. Drag it out. Make Ethan miserable. He might be pretending he's done with you, but money changes things. If you push the right buttons, he'll want this over with fast. And if he wants it fast," she smirked, "he'll pay." I felt a strange mixture of disgust and temptation coil in my chest. Diane had always been like this, ruthless, calculating. It was how she had raised me. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to be that woman anymore. I swallowed. "I need to think." She scoffed. "There's nothing to think about. If you don't act now, you'll walk away with nothing." Nothing. The word echoed in my mind. For the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand what it felt like to be truly powerless. And I hated it. The next morning I made my decision. I wasn't going to let Ethan go without a fight. If he thought he could just cut me off, replace me, erase me, he was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't that easy to get rid of. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "David," I said the moment he answered. "I need to contest the divorce." I sat in my lawyer's office, my foot tapping anxiously against the marble floor as David skimmed through the divorce papers. His expression remained unreadable, which only made my nerves worse. I needed a plan now. David finally leaned back in his chair, adjusting his tie as he folded his hands on the desk. "Contesting the divorce isn't impossible," he said. "But it's risky. If Ethan wants to fight this, you could end up with nothing. Especially with the way things are stacked against you." My jaw tightened. "What do you mean, stacked against me?" He exhaled through his nose, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Julia, Ethan has money now. Serious money. That means he can afford the best legal team available. On top of that, he has leverage, evidence, witnesses, and quite frankly, momentum. Judges don't usually look kindly on spouses who abandon their partner during a medical crisis." I bristled. "I didn't abandon him." David gave me a pointed look. "The court will see it that way. And let's be honest, you didn't visit him once." I clenched my fists. "So what are you saying? That I should just walk away?" David hesitated. "No. I'm saying you need to be smart. You're not going to win Ethan back. Not after what you told me about his new situation." I flinched at the mention of her. Madeline. The woman who had walked into Ethan's life, and taken my place like she had been waiting for this moment. I swallowed down the bitterness rising in my throat. "So what do I do?" David tapped a finger against the papers. "You negotiate. If you contest the divorce, you drag this out for months, maybe years. Ethan doesn't want that. He wants to move on fast. Which means if you play your cards right, he might be willing to settle just to make this go away." I bit my lip considering. A settlement. Money. It wasn't the win I wanted, but it was something. It was power. It meant Ethan couldn't just walk away without paying for what he had done to me. I inhaled sharply and nodded. "Do it. File whatever you have to." David sighed but didn't argue. "All right. I'll draw up the paperwork." A week later I got my answer. David called me into his office, his tone unreadable. When I arrived he had a folder sitting in front of him, untouched. I sank into the chair across from him. What is it? He slid the folder toward me. Ethan's counteroffer. My pulse spiked. I flipped it open and skimmed the contents, my eyes darting to the numbers printed on the page. $500,000. I felt like I had been slapped. This is a joke, right? My voice came out uneven. David's expression remained neutral. It's an offer. A fair one, considering your situation. Fair? Ethan is worth $40 million and he's offering me $500,000? I was his wife for years. David didn't flinch. Legally, that doesn't mean much when you weren't a supportive spouse. If this goes to court, you'll be lucky to walk away with half of that. I shook my head, my heart pounding. No, this isn't right. He owes me more than this. David sighed. Then you have two options. Accept the settlement and move on with dignity, or contest it and risk getting nothing. Nothing. That word again. I gritted my teeth. I want to see him. David raised an eyebrow. That's not a good idea. I don't care, I snapped. I want to talk to him face to face. David hesitated but eventually nodded. I'll arrange a meeting. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a high-rise office building, Ethan's company headquarters. David had managed to schedule a private meeting in one of the conference rooms. I adjusted my dress, squared my shoulders and walked inside. A receptionist escorted me to a sleek, glass-walled conference room. Ethan was already there, sitting at the far end of the table, looking completely unbothered. He didn't stand when I entered. Didn't acknowledge me beyond a glance. Madeline was there too, seated beside him like she belonged there. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to ignore her. I sat down across from them, my hands tightening in my lap. $500,000, I said coldly. That's insulting, Ethan. He didn't react. It's generous. I scoffed. Generous? After everything we had? You're worth $40 million and you think I'm going to walk away with pennies? Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. We didn't have a marriage, Julia. We had an arrangement, one that you checked out of long before I did. I swallowed hard, hating how calm he was. I was still your wife. Madeline scoffed softly. Not really. I whipped my head toward her, my nails digging into my palms. No one asked for your opinion. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. This is exactly why we're here, to finalize this and move on. I glared at him. I'm not moving on for $500,000. He exhaled slowly. Then take me to court. But let me make one thing clear, if you do, you'll lose. And when that happens, you'll walk away with nothing. His words sent an icy chill down my spine. I wanted to call his bluff, but deep down I knew he was right. I had nothing on him. No leverage. No claim to his money. I had lost. The realization hit like a crushing weight. My throat tightened. You really hate me that much? Ethan shook his head. No. I don't hate you at all, Julia. He paused, his eyes steady on mine. I just don't care anymore. And that was worse than hate, because it meant he was truly, completely done. I felt my last bit of control slipping through my fingers. David cleared his throat. Julia, we need an answer. I stared at the papers in front of me, my vision blurring. $500,000. The only thing left of my marriage. My hand shook as I reached for the pen. Ethan didn't watch. He didn't wait for my reaction. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the room. Madeline followed, her hand brushing against his arm. And just like that, it was over. I signed the papers. And for the first time in my life, I was truly completely alone.